I'm not sure what troubled me the most. The fact that I failed as a husband or father. I'm not sure whether I was depressed or just furious. It was confusing, to say the least. I've spent my entire life trying to improve things for my family, and all I've ended up doing is giving them things and money that don't work. It rapidly became clear that my only function was to keep the well full. I loved my wife, and I adored my children. Please keep in mind that everything was written in the past tense. I own my own firm, Welding Associates. Terry Martin and I grew up together. We were best friends from elementary school on up. Terry and I founded the company shortly after finishing trade school, and it increased faster than we had anticipated. So, technically, I should state that we run our own business. A few years later, we both married our high school sweethearts. Life was nice for the first 15 years or so. Everything was excellent. The company was performing nicely. Terry and I were both earning good salaries, and we had over 30 full-time employees. Terry and his wife Myra have 3 sons. Allison and I have twins, a boy and a female. We both owned modest-sized McMansions. We enjoyed eating out, taking good holidays, and driving luxury cars. Terry and I were very business-oriented. Business came first. We realized early on how crucial it was to keep both our consumers and our employees satisfied. A third of our finest employees were ex-convicts. We hired them directly from the jail trade school. In 8 years, just 2 of the ex-con workers posed a difficulty, which was promptly resolved by the other criminals. They had it good, and we are not going to let any deadbeats ruin things for them. We contributed to various community programs and even sponsored a softball team. Unfortunately, my home life was not as favorable. My wife became involved in a variety of progressive issues. I wasn't thrilled about it, but she let me do my thing, and I let her do hers. Politics had never been a part of our household, but we suddenly began to discuss current events and political developments. I tried hard to avoid such chats, but it was futile. The more I ignored her, the more determined she became. It seemed as if CNN and Fox News were playing simultaneously. I attempted to avoid her, but it was difficult. As my wife and I grew apart, so did my children and I. I'd been trying for years to get my kid Jacob interested in any sort of activity. I didn't care whether it was sports, hiking, or hunting and fishing. All he wanted to do was play video games and, as I subsequently discovered, smoke marijuana occasionally. All of my efforts were unsuccessful. Finally, my wife urged me to leave him alone and mind my own business. I would have fought harder, but my son smirked at me as she said it. My daughter Jordan was a clone of her mother. She used to be Daddy's little angel, but now she doesn't recognize me as her father at all. Despite the fact that she was on birth control, I couldn't count all of her piercings. It did not stop her from receiving the clap twice. She enjoyed accompanying her mother to various political and social occasions, but she would never consider going out for ice cream or pizza with her father. I gave up trying with her as well. One of the most significant setbacks occurred when I declined to provide corporate funds to one of her initiatives. They wanted to offer needles to drug users so that they wouldn't become infected with shared or unclean ones. Allison did not speak to me for a week. It was difficult to imagine that things could grow worse. The company Christmas celebration was approaching. Terry and I requested Allison and Myrna take care of it. Myrna was overjoyed, but she had to pull Allison kicking and screaming to help her. Allison had been going out more and more in the last 2 months. She was also taking overnight journeys to engage in various progressive events. I'm not sure whether they were protests, rallies, or seminars. It did not matter. Jacob had gone from grass to pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure what sort, but it didn't matter either. Jordan now owned her own video camera website. Myrna did an excellent job at the holiday gathering. She attempted to share the credit with Allison, but Terry and I knew better. We had beer and wine, but no strong alcohol. We had 100% staff participation, and I believe the annual incentive checks contributed to it. Allison and the kids were present, of course, but they did not appear to be enjoying themselves as much as everyone else. There was no sit-down meal, but there was plenty of food. John, I need to speak with you for a minute. Terry tried not to stand out as we walked over to the side. What up? I tried to keep it casual to make him feel it comfortable. George Martinez needs to talk to you, but he is nervous. What do you mean? I questioned. He doesn't want to ruin the celebration or make you furious, but he believes that there is something you should know. Jorge was one of the ex-cons. He had been with us for 6 years, and we did not want to lose him. Okay, bring him over. It's not going to be a problem, right? Terry gave me a small grimace. Jorge and his wife Elena appeared apprehensive. I smiled and tried to appear casual, hoping to put them at ease. Terry walked silently away. Mr. Terrell, we don't want to cause any problems, but when my wife saw your wife today, she felt compelled to say something. I attempted to persuade her out of it, but she was adamant. I looked at his wife and nodded, indicating that she should continue. She stared at Jorge, elbowed him, and gestured for him to speak. Elena works at the Hampton Inn. She has been in charge of housekeeping on the 5th level for the past 2 years. Your wife and Mr. Franklin have been using rooms 5 or 11 once or twice a week for the past year. They frequently stay for 2 or 3 hours in the same room. I was speechless. I had a million questions, but I didn't think this was the time or place to bring them up. Elena appeared happy that it was all over, but Jorge was nervous since he couldn't predict how I would react. I simply grasped his hand in both mine, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Thank you." I smiled at Elena and motioned for both of them to rejoin the party. Jorge relaxed. As I walked out, I passed Terry. Give Hawk a raise next month. Kyle Franklin led the city's parking authority. I didn't know him well, but I knew he'd been a government servant for about 20 years. He wanted to run for mayor eventually. He married Nora Franklin, the owner of one of the county's best real estate enterprises. She was a beautiful woman who likes to place her advertisements on the side of city buses. I'm wondering if she got a special pricing. My wife gave me a royal chewing out that evening for leaving the party early. The kids weren't happy either. I merely smiled and returned to my reading. After 70 years, Mickey Spillane's stories remained enjoyable. On Monday morning, I waited patiently in the Franklin real estate office for Nora Franklin to come. The secretary had a pot of hot coffee running, and I had brought the huge kill with me. She sauntered in about 10 steps, then paused for a second to stare at me. Mr. Tyrrell, I was wondering when you'd show up. It took you long enough. I followed her inside the office, carrying my coffee with me. I suppose when you control the company, you can set your own hours. Why hadn't I thought of that? Can I call you John? I nodded my approval to her. John, I'm not going to repeat all of the drama. I just want to know what you intend to accomplish. I have a lot going on, and I don't want you to mess things up. That wasn't what I expected. I imagined I'd be performing the big reveal. Boy, was I mistaken. I began. Miss Franklin, it appears that I am much behind the power curve here. I hadn't even figured it out for myself. A friend recently tipped me off. I don't know what to do next and have no one to confide in or discuss it with. To be honest, I assumed you were uninformed, just as I was. John, I've known about it for more than 6 months. I suppose I should have informed you sooner, but I had a lot of things to do and didn't want you to ruin the work by doing something rash. By the way, call me Nora, she answered. What do you mean by anything rash? I questioned. Oh, like going Rambo on Kyle in public, maybe exposing them in an embarrassing way. It's hard to predict what you macho men will do when something like this happens. I believe it is far more successful if you approach it gently. I never considered myself macho, I responded. Anyway, what are your plans? How can I help you? I dropped down in my chair and let out a long sigh. I suppose we'll need extra time during the following 2 weeks. Nora Franklin and I became close friends. Nora had been deliberately setting up her spouse for several months. The IRS was quite interested in his taxes. Nora had properly separated her personal and business taxes from his. The state attorney's office was looking into how he was diverting public monies intended for roads and transportation to other unrelated projects. The city was looking into his usage of city monies for lodging and restaurant expenses. What made it more remarkable was that she was able to persuade all of them to cooperate in their investigations, allowing them to all arrive at almost the same time. None of these attempts, however, improved my predicament. She did, however, arrange a contract to sell her real estate business, which I found intriguing. I could make something like that work. My main issue was the house and family. I no longer had a close relationship with my wife or my 2 children. I regretted leaving the company, but it was necessary. Nora had the solution. About a month later, I announced that we were moving to a new home. Allison's ears perked up, but all I heard from the youngsters was a sigh. They adored our McMansion. Jordan became interested when I mentioned the pool, and Jacob felt the 3-car garage would be cool. The excursion to see the new house went smoothly. It was twice as big as our current one, and cost more than twice as much. The children each had their own bath. Allison mentioned that we didn't have enough furnishings to properly fill the new house, but she seemed pleased. I promised her she could get all new things. She adored the professional kitchen. To top it all off, I informed them that we would be getting new cars for the first time in years. I was a fantastic father and husband. Nora did a wonderful job of getting me a new dwelling. It just took her 2 days to prepare all of the paperwork. Allison grimaced a little when I told her that Franklin Real Estate would be managing the transaction for us, but then appeared to accept it. Nora had already found a cash buyer for our old house. It was strange to see my wife and her lover's wife seated at the same table to sign the forms. There were no false greetings. We just sat down and started working on the papers. The first stack to be signed involved the selling of the old residence. Allison and I signed everything as Nora presented it and had it notarized. We received $450,000 for the transaction and had it electronically deposited. Allison was in a good mood and not paying attention. Signing the papers for the new house was the next step. Allison grinned when Nora said the price was $900,000. She smiled again when I explained that I was putting the new house in her name for tax considerations. She thought it was an excellent idea. She didn't realize it was a purchase option rather than a sales contract. If she'd read the fine print, she would have realized that the option was for 120 days. If the transaction was not completed by that point, the price would revert to $1 million and the $40,000 option would be forfeited. I disliked losing money, but it would be worthwhile in the long run. After everything was signed and notarized, Nora gave her the keys to her new home and congratulated her. It appeared real, and I struggled not to chuckle. Allison was upbeat all the way home. She didn't expect me to actually place the house in her name. She also wasn't expecting the $10,000 gift card from our local high-end furnishing store. It is sometimes necessary to spend money in order to earn money. The following day was Automobile Day. Jacob chose a Mustang, which I expected. Jordan astonished everyone by choosing a lime green Kia Soul. Allison went for a white Lexus. I discussed to both of the youngsters the need of establishing a line of credit. They appeared to understand, which made it simple to have both of their cars registered in their names and, naturally, fully financed. What they didn't consider was that this would also require someone to make car payments. I did the same thing for Allison's new Lexus. I added 90 days of insurance to each of the new automobiles. The total monetary outlay for all 3 autos was just around $600. The majority of that went to tags and titles. Another worthwhile investment on my side. 1 week later, we were all settled into our new house. The more Nora and I worked together, the closer we became. We were getting together every day. Sometimes I'd help her with a project, and other times she'd help me. We appear to be becoming extremely comfortable with each other. Terry was in charge of our welding business, and Nora had enough people to run the real estate agency. All of our efforts were geared toward ending our marriages. Nora intended to wait until Kyle was brought up on charges by one of the agencies investigating him. She didn't know which one would arrive first. She appeared to believe that it didn't matter. My scenario was slightly different. I eventually determined that I didn't want a divorce. I had too much to lose, but I felt I needed to do something. I just wanted it all gone. Nora came to the rescue yet again. "John, have you ever traveled to Aruba?" she questioned. "Just a port of call while on a cruise. But I never did remain there. Did you like it?" she asked. I was not there long enough to make a decision. "Why are you asking?" "I have the option of purchasing a condominium in Oran, just west, for $1,002,000. Would you be interested in anything like this?" She answered, "That may be a tad tight for me. I probably don't need something so elaborate. I was thinking we could go half and half. I am confident you could do it," she asked. "I am sure I could, but you are more than capable of handling it. Why would you even consider including me in something like that? Consider this a partnership. In other words, an investment. I imagine myself to be an astute businesswoman. I enjoy using other people's money. Besides, I enjoy your company." That caught my interest. "What $500,000? Get me a buy-in," I asked. "I'll prepare the papers. There will be paperwork, you know." "Absolutely," I responded. I was amazed that I had accepted to live with a lady with whom I had never had intimacy. I was now more enthusiastic about the overall project. Terry and Myrna were both completely aware of my issues with Allison and the children. They were eager to help in any manner they could without being obtrusive. "Terry, I've chosen to sell my portion of the business to you and Myrna." "That is very sweet, John, but we cannot afford to buy you out," Terry replied. "I'd like to, but you know that's not possible. How does $1,000 sound? Would you like to explain that?" Terry questioned Terry. "You don't need me to help you run your business. We both understand that at this point, it will nearly run itself. I'm going to leave soon, and everything will be on your shoulders. You will be the single proprietor, and you will make all choices. All you have to do is phone me on a regular consulting basis." "I see," replied the blind guy, "and I assume that there will be a consultation charge associated with that phone call." Terry replied, smiling. "Consider it a life annuity. Don't stress too much about it. Just make things easier for yourself." We had our company lawyer draw up all of the necessary paperwork. Terry and Myrna were afraid that I was screwing up, but I told them that I had everything under control. It was good to have a friend you could trust. It appears amusing, but I never bothered to investigate Allison's fling with Kyle. I never felt the need to get incriminating images, emails, or phone messages. I would not need them. I was not getting divorced. I planned to do what 21% of deadbeat dads do. Just leave. 2 weeks later, Kyle Franklin was arrested. I don't even know who received the distinction. He wasn't a big-time criminal or embezzler. He was merely a tiny civil servant who fooled about with my wife. Nora and I had been gone a long time before the dirt came out. She'd sold her company, 32 rental properties, and 3 apartment buildings. She was prepared for life. I was her assigned male toy. That is how she referred to me, and I did not find it objectionable. We did got to finalize our relationship after arriving in Aruba, but there was no wooing time. It seemed as if everything had been decided upon beforehand. I did not miss my children. Does this make me a bad father? Under the conditions, I don't believe so. I didn't miss my wife. Does this make me a lousy husband? I do not think so. Nora became a regular golfer. She tried to pique my curiosity, but there was no spark. She had a regular group of females with whom she played 3 days each week. We met together with them and a dozen other expats several times a week to socialize. I rapidly accustomed to that. It was a fresh, unfettered lifestyle that was extremely pleasurable. I decided to take up painting to pass the time. I've always wanted to do it. Every morning, I'd walk down to the docks and set up my easel. I sucked at it. I would return to the apartment later, and the first thing I would do was scrape off all of the paint from the canvas so that I could start again the following day. It's been 3 months, and I still have nothing to show for it. Nora thinks it's rather humorous. I had tried to avoid making touch with anyone, but I felt compelled to phone Terry John. "It is about time. I was starting to give up on you. Have you settled in yet?" he asked. "I've settled in and feel better than ever. It was the best decision I've ever made." For the next 10 minutes, we discussed my new life in Aruba with Nora. I had no issue convincing Terry to bring Myrna down for a week or two. The business was performing nicely. Terry apologized for not mailing the consultation checks, but I failed to provide him with an address or a bank account number. I didn't need the money anyway. Terry, I'm sorry to bring it up, but could you maybe provide an update on the situation of my wife and family? I questioned. I don't know everything, but I'll do what I can. Things don't appear to be going well without you. First of all, Jacob has been arrested. He was nabbed with several hundred pounds of fentanyl in the trunk of his car. The vehicle was, of course, confiscated. And now that he was over the age of 18, he was locked up. Allison couldn't get him released on bail. I know nothing else about it. Sorry to hear this. I know I am his father, but I honestly don't care what happens to him. I tried and failed, I replied. Jordan's situation isn't any better. Shortly after moving into her new home, she expanded her webcam site. I heard she was acquiring a lot of subscribers. And then one day she informed her mother she was traveling to California to meet a producer guy. 2 weeks later, they discovered her Kia abandoned in Memphis. Allison hasn't heard anything about or from her since. I assume you're getting most of this information from Allison, I asked. Yeah. She visits the workplace frequently, trying to catch you. I can tell she doesn't trust me when I say you've left. She was outraged last week when she received notice to exercise the option on the house or vacate the premises by the end of the month. John is really clever. She was really perplexed right now. I'm not sure what her objectives are. I believe some of the utilities have been shut off. She couldn't afford to pay her power bill. Did you help her? I asked. Don't be mad, John. I handed her $1,000 and instructed her to spend it as a deposit for an apartment somewhere. I'm sure she'll spend it on something else. Myrna felt bad for her. I snickered a little. Okay, Terry, I understand. Simply take it out of my next commission. By the way, can't her lover aid her now? Terry was chuckling. He's in worse shape than she is. All I know is what we watch on television. He is no longer in the news, but nuggets appear from time to time. I believe he is going away for a time. Before I forget, Allison's automobile was repossessed because all of her credit cards had expired, and she is unable to utilize Uber. I am not sure how she is getting around. We talked a little more about the business. They made tentative plans for their approaching holiday to Aruba. It was a good talk. I signed up for an online painting school with a guy from the UK. 2 months later, one of the marina employees asked me to paint a picture of his sailboat. Nora is concerned that I may cut my ear off. Life carries on. Here's the next story. The music reverberated through the walls. As I entered the hotel ballroom, I felt a constant pulse of bass vibrating in my ribs. I was not intended to be here. Emily had made it obvious. It's only a work event, darling. Boring corporate nonsense. You'd despise it, she'd said earlier. She rolled her eyes and straightened her earrings. I will be back before midnight. She said it so casually and smoothly that I almost believed her, but something had been bothering me for weeks. A calm, lingering worry had crept in my gut. Emily had changed. It wasn't simply the late nights or the sudden fixation on her phone. It wasn't only the fresh scent or pricey lingerie I never got to see, or how she suddenly appeared distant. No, it was something deeper, more intuitive. So I followed her. The celebration was far from boring. Women in tight dresses clung to men wearing costly suits. Laughter poured over the rims of drink glasses. The air smelt of perfume, sweat, and deception. Emily was nowhere in sight. I pushed past the mob and scanned the room. My heartbeat quickened. Then I saw her. She was not alone. She was standing beside the bar. Her back was crushed against a guy's chest, his hands lazily resting on her waist. She laughed. I laughed at something, he whispered into her ear. A second man stood near them, watching and smirking. I froze. Something within me splintered. For a minute, I did nothing. I just stood there, my fingers curled into fists at my sides, watching my wife. My wife led another man to touch her, as if she belonged to him. Then she turned her head, and our gazes connected. I expected guilt. I expected shock, maybe even dread. Instead, she grinned slowly, as if she were amused. like she wanted me to see. I had moved before I recognized it, shoving past a waitress, knocking over a glass. Somebody cursed. A woman gave a gasp. I didn't care. Emily moved away from the man, tilting her head. "Well, that was quick," she replied, her voice full of faux astonishment. I paused inches from her, my chest rising and sinking with frantic breaths. "What the hell is this?" She looked at the men beside her and exchanged a glance with the taller one, the person whose hands had touched her a second ago. He didn't seem worried. He looked amused. Emily groaned and shook her head. "Do not be theatrical, sweetheart. It's only beverages." I felt my fingers twitching. My mind screamed at me, telling me it wasn't real, that this could not be occurring. "But it was cocktails," I repeated, my voice hollow. The second man chuckled. "Relax, guy. She's having fun." I turned to him so quickly that he took a half step back. "Say it again." Emily sighed and rubbed her temples, like if I were the problem here. "God, you're embarrassing yourself," she murmured before giving me a scowl. "Will you go home?" "I will see you later." That was it. No excuses, no apologies, just a dismissal. As if I were a miserable inconvenience. Something within me cracked. I couldn't feel myself moving until I grabbed her wrist. Not hard, just enough to get her to glance at me. "Let go!" She spoke quietly, warning. I retained her eyes. "Who are they?" She pulled her hand free and giggled. Not uneasily or guiltily, but just laughing. "Oh, sweetheart." She purred and reached up to pat my cheek, like if I were a child. "You do not want to know." 1,000 thoughts ran through my mind. I had 1,000 things to say. But before I could do anything, before I could even take a breath, her phone vibrated in her clutch. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and smiled. Then, without saying anything else, she walked away from me and toward the elevators. The two men followed. I did not move. Couldn't. I was just standing there, surrounded by strangers, watching my wife disappear behind shutting elevator doors with two men. She was plainly not done yet. And then, hours later, at 3 a.m., my phone called with a voice I didn't recognize. Smooth, amused, cold. "Your wife was with us." The man spoke. "Now it's time to pay." Something within of me stilled. I didn't inquire what they meant. I didn't ask them what they wanted. I simply hung up. I reached for my car keys and dialed a number that I hadn't contacted in years. The voice on the other end responded promptly. "It's me," I said. "I need you." A pause, then one word which I swallowed. "We are going hunting." I drove like a man possessed. The city lights blurred past me, neon streams across the wet pavement. My hands were calm, and I had control over my breathing. But inside, I was on fire. Emily, these males, a phone call. I replayed everything in my thoughts, scrutinizing each second. "Your wife was with us. Now it's time to pay." What exactly did they mean? How do I pay? I didn't care. I was not negotiating. I arrived at the location where I had informed him to meet me. A darkly illuminated parking lot behind a 24-hour eatery. The type of location where no one asked questions. Even if they did, the replies were never satisfactory. He was already present. We served together overseas. We weren't just brothers in arms. We were brothers on a deeper level. Men like us. We did not proceed normally. We didn't have 9-to-5s, backyard barbecues, or PTA meetings. We caused chaos. We committed violence. Right now, I needed both. He leaned on his Jeep. Arms crossed. I watched myself draw up. Nate is the same as always, with his piercing eyes. I'm built like a wolf, radiating the fatal calm that only men who have witnessed true hell can have. He talked immediately after I turned off the engine. "What is the job?" I stepped out and tossed my phone to him. "Read the last call." He looked down, skimmed the screen, and then slowly exhaled, his eyes flickering up to mine. "Are you sure?" I didn't respond. He looked at me for a second, and then nodded. "Tell me everything." I told him every detail. Emily's behavior, the party, and the way she looked me in the eyes before walking away as if I were nothing. And then came the call. When I was finished, he ran his fingers through his short, cropped hair, processing. This sounds like a setup, he murmured. Could be blackmail. It could be worse. I did not flinch. I don't care what it is. I simply want her back. Nate's jaw constricted. Are you sure she wants to be found? That was like a punch to the ribs. I pushed the thought down. She's my wife. I said. He did not argue, just nodded. All right, he murmured as he pushed off the Jeep. Let's go hunt. We started in the motel. By the time we arrived, the lobby was quiet. The party is long ended. The receptionist, a bored-looking lady in her 50s, barely looked up when we approached. I slid the phone over the desk. The screen displays an image of Emily. She was here tonight. Room number. She sighed, unimpressed. Sir, we cannot provide guest information. Nate leaned forward, smiling, and his voice was as soft as silk. Listen, we do not have time for policies. You give us the room number, and we depart. Otherwise, we begin generating noise. Do you want that? She paused. Then take a look around. She typed something into the computer room in 1908, she mumbled. We did not wait for more. We took the stairs. By the time we reached the 19th level, I could feel adrenaline coursing through my veins. Cold and electrical. Nate gestured me to slow down. He put one ear to the door. I listened. Then he knocked. Silence. Then action. The lock clicked. The door cracked open. A man stood there, shirtless, muscular, and smiling, as if he were expecting someone else. I recognized him immediately. One of them. Before he could respond, I threw the door open, causing him to stumble back. And then I spotted her. Emily dressed in a silk robe, standing by the bed, not chained up or crying, just standing there calmly, unconcerned, like she belonged, as if she hadn't meant to leave. And when our gazes connected, she grinned. Wow, she said, tilting her head. That was quick. Something inside me shattered, and I wasn't sure if I could put it back together, so I didn't move, did not take a breath, didn't blink. Emily stood there, covered only in a silk robe, her naked legs crossed at the ankles, and her fingers leisurely traced the edge of a champagne flute. She gazed at me in the same way a bored cat looks at a dead mouse, amused, indifferent, and perhaps a little disappointed. You know, she continued, sipping her drink. This is precisely why I didn't want you to go tonight. You're always overreacting. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat behind me. Nate changed his stance, relaxed but prepared, his gaze flitting between Emily and the man I had just pushed across the room. The guy grumbled and rubbed his jaw, but he didn't rush to get up. I took a slow stride forward. Explain, I said. My voice came out low. Controlled, too controlled. Emily breathed through her nose, as if I had exhausted her. What exactly are you explaining? That I am here. That I am enjoying myself. For once, I don't have to pretend. She tilted her head. Her smirk grows wider. Face it, babe. You were never designed for a lady like me. Something inside me became frigid. I did not respond. Not yet. I simply gazed at her. I noticed everything. The robe was barely fastened at the waist. Her hair was in unruly waves. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, and she wore an expensive watch on her wrist. That was not mine. She was not kidnapped. She was not being held against her will. She was right where she wanted to be. I tightened my jaw. Who phoned me? Her sneer did not waver. What? I took another step. We're becoming closer together. Who phoned me? Her eyes hardly fluttered for a second, and in that moment, I knew she wasn't expecting me to ask that. Nate, still resting against the door, let out a deep sigh. That's exactly what I was wondering. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh my God, it was only a joke. I went, and it was still a joke. She giggled, shook her head, and laid the champagne glass on the nightstand. Relax, caveman. Derek figured it would be humorous. She motioned to the man on the floor. Guess he was correct. What about the guy? Derek smiled, wiping a trace of blood from his lips. Damn, man. You came in hot. Nate chuckled behind his breath. You've no idea. I ignored him. My gaze was fixed on Emily. You allowed another man phone your spouse at 3 a.m. and tell him it was time to pay. So you think it's funny? Emily sighed, as if I were embarrassing her. Oh, please. I knew you would overreact, but I didn't expect you to bring backup. Seriously, what were your plans? Kick the door down. Drag me out like a helpless little wife. She gave a harsh laugh. Newsflash, sweetie. I choose to be here. Derek pushed himself up, rolling his shoulders as if this were a mere inconvenience. Look, man, no hard feelings. Yeah, she is a grown woman. She makes her own decisions. I did not glance at him. Couldn't. If I gazed at him, I could break his face. Emily was closely watching me right now. That sneer is still on her lips. Her eyes, however, revealed something more, something calculated. She believed she was in control here. She believed she was winning. She assumed I was just going to leave. Nate stepped forward, slow and casual, hands in his pockets. So let's get this straight. He nodded to Emily. You cheated on your husband? He motioned toward Derek. Your boyfriend phones him with a sinister threat for laughs. He clicked his tongue. And you believe that would end nicely for you? Emily arched her brow. What is that intended to mean? Nate smiled, but there was no comedy in it. It suggests you made a mistake with your calculations. Nate drew his gun before Emily or Derek could react or grasp what was going on. The silencer scarcely made a noise. A single shot into Derek's leg. The man collapsed like a house of cards. A scream ripped through his throat as blood flowed on the carpet. Emily screamed, "And I didn't move! Did not flinch, just watched." Nate knelt beside Derek and pressed the rifle barrel under his chin. I don't enjoy jokes. His voice was quiet and flat. Do you? Derek whimpered and clutched his leg. Jesus, what's the F? Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Nate tilted his head. The wrong answer. Emily's cheeks had turned pale. Her breath hitched as she turned to face me. Her look was filled with fury and panic. Are you insane? I simply stared at her. I come to bring you home, I said in a firm voice. I came here because I suspected you were in trouble. Her mouth opened and closed. I took a step closer and lowered my voice. Emily, I don't know who you are anymore, she swallowed. For the first time that night, I noticed a tremendous flutter in her eyes. Fear. She drew a hesitant breath and looked down at Derek, who was still groaning with blood pooling around him. Then her gaze returned to mine, calculating again. Fine, she whispered. Take me home. I nodded. And with that, we walked out of the room, Emily by my side. Nate's behind us. Derek is bleeding on the floor. But as the elevator doors closed, I realized it wasn't over. The ride home was silent. Emily sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the road ahead, like she wasn't sitting next to the man she had just degraded, as if she wasn't seated alongside the man whose friend had just shot her lover in the leg. She didn't inquire about Derek. I didn't inquire if he was alive. She didn't care. And perhaps it is what burnt the most. Nate trailed after us, his Jeep's headlights illuminating my rearview mirror like a predator observing its prey. He wasn't finished. Neither was I. Emily moved and exhaled forcefully. Will you speak, or will we sit in foolish, brooding quiet all night? I strengthened my grasp on the wheel. I do not have anything to say to you. She laughed. Short and bitter. Please do not behave like you are a tragic victim. Let's get honest here. You were never man enough to maintain my attention. I turned to face her. Then, just a second. Just long enough to ensure she noticed what was in my gaze. Not in pain, not heartbreak, something else, something colder. She swallowed. I looked away. Good. I didn't speak again until we pulled into the driveway. Nate parked beside me, but he didn't immediately get out. He waited, watched, and made sure I was okay before leaving. I killed the engine. Turned towards Emily. Get in. She rolled her eyes but complied. Because, now that she understood everything, this was no longer a conversation. This was wartime. I followed her inside, closing the door behind us. The house felt strange, colder, as if it had absorbed the treachery. She threw her purse on the counter and turned to face me. Arms crossed. So, What happens now? You are going to play the tragic husband and cry yourself to sleep. I stared at her. Sit down. She blinked. What? I pointed to a chair at the kitchen table. Sit now. For the first time that night, I noticed hesitancy. She was not afraid of me. No, Emily was not the sort to be afraid of the repercussions, but she was afraid of losing control. She did not have it right now. She slowly lowered herself into the chair. I sat down across from her. We were quite close. I could see her chest rise and fall slightly, and her fingers curled just a bit too tightly around the table's edge. I leaned forwards. Tell me everything, she scoffed. What is this about? I didn't flinch about them. Approximately how long this has been going on. About why you assumed I wouldn't find out. She smirked and leaned back in her chair. Why do you care? Do you already know? You've made up your mind about me. I kept my voice even. Say it anyway. She regarded me for a moment before shrugging. She said, fine. Do you want the truth? I had been sleeping with Derek for 4 months. I felt my jaw tightening. She continued, her voice light and easygoing, as if we were discussing the weather. And, to be completely honest, he was not the first, only the most current. Something twisted within me. Who else? She tilted her head. Does it matter? I stared at her, and for the first time, I truly saw her. Not the lady I married, not the woman I spent my life with, but a stranger with her face. I do not even know who you are, I said. She rolled her eyes. Oh, my God. Are you really going to do the whole heartbroken husband thing? The actual babe. You should have seen it coming. I gently inhaled, resisting the temptation to snap. What do you mean? She smirked. Come on. You realized I was too much for you. You knew I'd get bored eventually, but instead of doing something about it, you just left it be. I laughed. A low, unfunny sound. Do you think it is my fault? She shrugged. Do you think I wanted this? Do you suppose I wanted to sneak around? Lie to you? She shakes her head. No, I wanted excitement. I wanted someone to make me feel something. I clenched my fist. So you selected him. She grinned. I chose them. Something inside of me cracked. I jumped out of my seat, pounding my palms against the table so hard that the entire thing trembled. Do you think this is funny? Her smirk wavered. For the first time, she appeared unsure. Good. I leaned in. My voice is low, dangerous. You have embarrassed me. You allowed another man to call my phone in the middle of the night, as if I were some stupid loser who would not fight back. I shake my head. And you thought I'd just let it slide? She swallowed. What? What are you saying? I smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. I dug into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and hit play. Her voice filled the entire room. Breathy, laughing, moaning. I had recorded everything she said in her hotel room. Every syllable, every confession, every incriminating and twisted detail. Her eyes widened. What the hell? I shut her off. Do you desire excitement? Fine. Let's make this very spectacular. I tossed the phone on the table, watching her fumble for it. Her face was losing color. I crossed my arms. You have exactly 2 choices. She looked up. Panic is coming in now. What are the options? 1. I leaned on the table and spoke softly, almost gently. You are currently walking out of that door with nothing. No money, no house, and no divorce. Settlement. You vanish. She licked her lips. And what about the second option? I smiled wider. 2. I send the recording to everyone. Silence. She opened her mouth. I closed it. She understood what that meant. Her job, reputation, and family. Gone. I leaned down, my face inches from hers. Make your move, darling. Emily gulped hard. For the first time since the horror began, she had nothing to say. Emily breathed in fast, shallow bursts. I could see the gears churning in her mind, the desperate search for an escape. But there wasn't one. She was trapped and knew it. Her fingers clenched around my phone. You would not, she whispered. I leaned in. My voice is calm. Try me. She swallowed and looked down at the television, as if it were a bomb about to go off. I let her sit in it, allowing her to feel the weight bearing down on her. suffocating her in the same way I had felt when I walked into that hotel room. I saw her smirk at me, as if I were nothing. Her lips separated. "You don't need to do this." I arched my brow. "So you want to negotiate?" She flinched. I straightened and crossed my arms. "Let us be clear about something. You had every opportunity to come clean and tell me the truth. Instead, you laughed in my face." I shake my head. "So, no, Emily. I need to do this." She sat there, clutching my phone as if it was her only lifeline. She stopped grinning and rolling her eyes. That haughty, impenetrable assurance is gone, for the first time since it began. She appeared to be precisely what she was, a lady who had finally lost. The stillness between us was filled with tension. She then took a hesitant breath. "If I leave, how do I know you won't transmit it?" I smirked. "You do not?" Her hands had curled into fists. "You bastard!" I tilted my head. "Are you referring to your bastard? The person you lied to? Were you cheated on? Humiliated?" I gave a quiet chuckle. "Oh, sweetie, I am only getting started." Her face contorted with wrath. "Do you believe you are punishing me? Do I really care about this house? What about you?" She laughed sharply and bitterly. "You were always weak. That was why I became bored. That is why I left." I did not react, did not flinch, just stared at her, and then I gently murmured, "Leave." Something sparked in her gaze, as if she hadn't expected me to call her bluff, and a part of her wanted me to beg. But I wasn't that man anymore. She stood hastily and knocked over the chair. She threw my phone on the table as if it were poison. Her entire body trembled with wrath. "You're going to regret this." I smiled. "No, Emily. Yes, you are." She exhaled sharply, then turned and marched for the door. She grabbed her purse, yanking it over her shoulder. Then she hesitated and looked back. There was something in her eyes, something dark, something harmful. "Take care, babe," she muttered. "You could think you've won." She ran her tongue over her teeth and smiled coldly. But the game isn't over. Then she was gone. The door banged behind her. I breathed slowly. My muscles eventually relaxed. Footsteps came from behind me. Nate. He walked in, hands in pockets. He's watching me with that unreadable gaze. So it went nicely. I gave a dry chuckle. "She will come back." He nodded. "Yes, probably." We both stood for a moment, just breathing. He then clapped his palm on my shoulder. When she did, I grinned coldly. "Ready? Then I will be waiting." Emily did not disappear. I knew she would not. Women like her never leave silently. They linger, they plot, they find a way to turn the tables. 3 days later, she made her first move. It started with a knock on the door. Not a frantic one, not hesitant, just be steady, confident. It seemed as if the person on the other end of the line had unlimited time. I knew who it was before I opened it. Sure enough, there she stood. Emily. But this time, she wasn't wearing silk robes or fancy clothes. No seductive smirk. No phony affection. She was dressed for battle. Tight jeans, leather jacket, hair tied back, and standing right next to her. Hands slipped into his pockets. He wasn't a man I recognized. Tall, slim, and overly relaxed. Dangerous. Emily tilted her head. Something sharp is glinting in my eyes. "Are you going to invite us in?" I did not move. "No." She sighed heavily. "Come on, baby. That's not very welcoming." The man next to her chuckled. I took a good look at him and realized he was not much of a gentleman. Now my brain is accumulating details. The way his shoulders squared as I met his gaze. He kept his stance loose, but not too loose. His attention darted to my hands, seeking to see if I was armed. He was a fighter, perhaps worse. And immediately, I understood what was going on. Emily was not here to apologize. She was not come to beg. She came here to scare me. A gradual smile appeared on my face. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "What about Sam? Is there a new boyfriend already?" Emily grinned. "Not exactly." The man smirked. "Call me Jason." The first did not. Instead, I let the silence continue. Let them sit in it. Allow Emily to see that whatever game she was playing, she was not winning it. Finally, she groaned, faux disappointment oozing from her voice. I was hoping we could have a short conversation. What is this about? Her smile tightened as she remembered the recording you made. There it was. I remained silent, just observing her. She interpreted that as an encouragement to continue. You see, honey, it was not very cool of you. And now I find myself in a quandary. She pouted. I dislike unfinished business. Jason chuckled beside her. And we really, truly dislike it when people try to humiliate Emily. I arched my brow. We. Emily's sneer expanded. Oh dear, you did not believe I was alone in this, did you? I looked at Jason again. He stood with his fingers slightly flexed at his sides, as if he was eager to move. This wasn't a hired goon. This was someone's personal information. Someone she'd been saving for just this time. I breathed slowly. You came all the way here for a recording. Jason's smirk flickered. We came here because we enjoy tying up loose ends. I allowed those remarks to rest between us. Then I laughed. Soft love amused. Jason's smirk wavered. Emily furrowed her brow slightly. Before they could react, I opened the door further. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Emily hesitated. Jason frowned. I noticed it in their eyes. A short flash of uncertainty. This was not how things were meant to go. I was meant to be angry, scared, defensive. Not this. Emily soon recovered, flashing another sneer and walking inside as if she owned the place. Jason followed, but not before giving me one final lingering glance, sizing me up. Could I close the door behind them and lock it with a quiet click? They walked straight into my den and had no idea what was going to happen next. Jason moved first. He strolled in like a seasoned professional, scanning the space, mapping exits, and checking for hazards without drawing attention to himself. His fingers twitched, faintly, at his sides. Muscle memory suggests that he was used to carrying a weapon there. Emily, on the other hand, was not playing defense at all. She walked over to the kitchen counter, running her fingertips along it as if she were recalling. This house, for example, remained her property. She picked up a knife from the block and examined it leisurely. I've always disliked this kitchen. Too tiny. Too dull. I did not respond. Jason sat down at the dinner table, as if he had been invited. Legs stretched wide, arms extended across the back of the chair. A man makes himself at home. Emily eventually turned, the knife still in her grasp. She wasn't squeezing it tightly or threateningly. She was simply holding it. A visual reminder that she wasn't playing by the rules anymore. She smiled. Let's chat about the recording. I leaned against a wall, arms crossed. How about it? Jason's sneer was slow and deliberate. Are you going to delete it? I stared at him. No. Emily clicked her tongue. Babe, don't be difficult. I grinned, matching Jason's attitude. It's amusing how you come here, acting like you have control. But the moment you walk through that door, you're lost. Jason scoffed. Is that right? I shrugged. You've come because you need something from me. That indicates I have the power, not you. Emily rolled her eyes. Jesus, you have spent too much time with your tiny army buddy. Do you believe you're dangerous now? She shakes her head. Almost laughed. You are not. You are still just you. I pushed off the wall. Slow. Controlled. The first then reached into my pocket and took out my phone. Emily's gaze quickly focused on it. Jason's posture improved marginally, but not much. I turned the screen toward them and displayed a simple text message. I had written one link, one line. If you're reading this, you're already aware. I smiled. This message is sent to 20 distinct persons. If I don't cancel within the next 10 minutes. Emily's smirk had frozen. You're not telling the truth. I retained her eyes. Try me. She tightened her grasp on the knife. Jason exhaled and rubbed his jaw. That is the problem. I nodded. Yeah. For you? The room was silent and anxious. I let them sit in it and feel it crushing in on all sides. Then I said, in a hushed voice, you came here believing you could frighten or terrify me into submitting. I leaned forward slightly. But you made a mistake. Jason's jaw twitched. Yeah, what is that? I smiled wider. You assumed I would follow your rules. Emily moved first. She rushed quickly, the knife flashing near my arm. I was faster. I snatched her wrist in midair and twisted it just enough to make her yell, sending the blade clattering to the floor before she could recover. I propelled her backward, causing her to stumble into the table. Jason was already on his feet, as was Nate. The entrance door had swung open quietly. Jason had hardly turned before Nate's punch smashed into his chin, knocking him to the ground. The home exploded into motion. Emily attempted a run. I grabbed her by the back of her jacket, yanking her down into the chair she had confidently sat in minutes before. Jason was already pushing himself up, but Nate pressed a boot against his chest, pinning him down. I crouched in front of Emily, grabbing the chair's arms and leaning close. You came in here believing you had the upper hand, I muttered. You thought you could terrify me into breaking. I smiled. But, Emily, you never realized who you were married to. She gulped hard. I leaned back and kept my voice cool. Here's what is going to happen. I pointed to Jason. You are going to leave. You aren't going to look at me. You aren't going to talk to me. You are not even going to think about me. I tilted my head. Because if you do, I'll make sure you don't have a life to escape to. Jason scowled at me. I am having difficulty breathing. He looked at Nate, then back at me, and nodded. Good. I turned back to Emily. And you? She did not speak, did not move. For the first time in her life, Emily was out of moves. I smiled. You are going to disappear. Her breath caught. You cannot. I leaned in. Pay attention to me. And with that, the game was officially finished. Emily's hands trembled slightly against the chair's arms, but she hid it well. She'd always been skilled at pretending, but not now, not while she was cornered. Her gaze flashed to Jason, who was still pinned under Nate's boot. His breathing was heavy, but he was not foolish. He was not about to play the hero for her. Not now. You're a smart dude. I snatched the knife off the floor, spin it between my fingers. Emily is being carefully watched. You've spent years lying, manipulating, and playing your own games, I muttered. You got away with it for a while. I thought you were untouchable. I rested the blade on the table between us. But tonight, you finally lost Emily's locked jaw. You do not get to decide what happens to me. I laughed. Oh, sweetie, that's when you go wrong. She began to speak, but I interrupted her. You are going to disappear. You're going to pack whatever fits in one bag and walk out without saying anything. I tapped my phone against the table. Because if you don't, that recording will be the most popular download in this city. She scowled at me. I can still ruin you. I arched my brow with what? Your word. I shake my head. See, you burned every bridge you ever had. Your supervisors, they will see what you accomplished. Your friends, they will hear exactly who you are. My voice sank lower. Your family? They won't look at you the same way again. Her nostrils flared. You would not. I tilted my head. Try me. She glanced at me, her chest rising and falling. That fire is still glowing behind her eyes. She was not used to this. To be the one who had to submit. I let her to sit in it. Then I pulled my phone back and pressed a few keys. The footage disappeared from the screen. She blinked. What? I met her gaze. It's backed up in 5 separate places, but I'm not going to send it. I leaned forwards. The voice is calm. Not if you leave now. She paused. I exhaled and shook my head. You really don't understand, do you? You're not bargaining anymore. I reached for the knife again, twirling it between my fingers. Not a threat, a statement. You're leaving, or I'll make sure the world knows who you are. Her lips parted as if she intended to argue, as if she wants to fight. But she knew I'd already won. Her throat bobbed as she slowly swallowed. She stood, straightening up her jacket as if she still had some decorum to uphold. She turned to face Jason. Get up. He acted slowly. Nate took a step back and watched him closely. Jason rolled his shoulders, gave me a long, lingering look, and smirked. You're a nasty piece of work, he grumbled. I smiled. So I have been told. Emily grabbed her purse, pushing past me toward the door. But before she went outdoors, she halted for a second. She smirked as she looked back over her shoulder. Enjoy your small triumph. She purred. Will you miss me? I chuckled. Not for 1 second. She did not flinch or respond. She walked away without saying another word. Jason followed. Nate and I stood there, watching the door swing shut behind them at night, swallowing them whole. Emily vanished without a trace. Nate exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. Well, that was enjoyable. I let out a deep breath and nodded. It was over, finally. Actually, over. But I glanced at the vacant doorway. Something within of me whispered, she's not finished. Not yet. For 2 weeks, there was silence. Emily was gone. No calls, no messages, and no surprise sightings. Jason vanished with her, as if they never existed at all. I half expected to feel relieved when I could finally breathe, but I knew better. This was not over. Women like Emily do not disappear. They wait, and when they strike back, they make certain it hurts. Nate stayed close, checking in every day. He didn't say anything, but I knew what he was thinking. Emily was not the sort to walk away silently. She was not the sort to admit defeat. So when the vengeance arrived, I was not surprised. I was ready. We started small. A call from my bank. Someone has tried to empty my accounts. They failed. I'd already changed all my passwords. I locked everything shut. The second Emily walked out of my house. The police then paid a visit. A noise complaint, allegedly from my neighbors. The cops were nice, yet stern. We've received many complaints of violent outbursts. One of them mentioned yelling sounds of items shattering. People are worried. I nearly laughed. Emily was attempting to paint a picture. A dangerous and unpredictable husband. A guy unraveling without her. Nice try. But now for the actual move. The one I'd been waiting for arrived on a frigid Friday night when I returned home to find my front door wide open. Nate was already inside, his revolver pulled. His expression was unreadable as he motioned towards the kitchen. She was here. I stepped inside. Heart is steady, pulse regulated. Nothing was stolen. There's no mess. There's no trace of a break-in. But then I noticed the table. A single wine glass lay in the middle. Red lipstick smudged down the rim. In addition, there is a notation for words written in a smooth, attractive script. Have you missed me yet, babe? My jaw clenched. Nate breathed through his nose. She's playing games. I took up the note, looking at the penmanship. She intended to rattle me. She wanted me to react. But I was not the same man. She walked away. I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, and turned to Nate. She wants to play, I muttered. He met my gaze, then let us play. I didn't call her, chase her, or allow her to believe she still had influence over me. I waited because Emily had already made an error. Breaking into my residence was not simply reckless. The situation was desperate. It indicated she needed control back. I needed to show that she still had a hold on me. She wanted me to react emotionally. Instead, I planned. Nate and I headed to work. We began digging silently, carefully. Emily believed she was untouchable, but nobody is, not really. And it didn't take long before I found just what I was looking for. A financial trail. Emily wasn't simply living off her own money. She was smart enough to keep things disguised, but not enough to cover all of her traces. She had accounts and investments that were not legally pure, as well as those that were linked to persons who would be upset if she brought them to light. Jason wasn't simply some muscle-bound idiot she was fooling around with. He had connections, bad ones. And Emily. She was in deep. So I placed a call, not to Emily, not to Jason, to them. It only took a few well-placed words, a subtle nudge in the appropriate direction. Emily was suddenly no longer my problem. She was theirs. 3 nights later, she finally broke. It was after midnight when the call arrived. A blocked number. I responded, already knowing who it was. Her breathing was irregular, shaky. You son of a bitch. I slumped back into my chair, calm. Is there a problem, sweetheart? Do you think this is funny? She hissed. Do you think I don't know what you did? I smiled. Oh, I believe you have just figured it out. Silence. Then, a sharp breath. They came to Jason's apartment. They took him. I said nothing. Her voice crackled. They want me next. Good. I let the silence extend, allowing her to sit in her fear. Then I spoke, my voice gentle and calm. Sounds like you should have remained away. Her breath caught. I leaned forwards. I warned you, Emily. I offered you a choice. But you preferred to play games. You wanted to win. I shake my head. You've just lost for the first time ever. She had nothing to say. I let the silence linger, allow her to feel the full weight of it. Then he said nothing more. I hung up. Emily was out of my life for good. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.